Angela had just finished her shift at the local diner, a cozy spot that doubled as the town's unofficial meeting place. She worked hard to keep things running smoothly there, pouring coffee with a smile and chatting with regulars, some of whom she'd known for years. It was a small town, and though it wasn't perfect, Angela had always believed it was a good place to raise her boys, Malik and Jordan. Her kids were her world, and she did everything she could to keep them safe, happy, and on the right path. One rainy afternoon, as Angela was drying dishes and listening to the sound of raindrops hitting the diner's windows, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She wiped her hands and answered, expecting it to be one of the boys calling to ask what was for dinner. But the voice on the other end wasn't familiar. It was the school principal. He sounded stern, telling Angela that her son Malik was in trouble for something serious: vandalism on school property. Angela's heart sank. She knew her son, knew he wouldn't do something like that. Malik was a quiet kid, always keeping to himself, and he'd never caused trouble before. She asked the principal what evidence they had, but his answers were vague. He said it was an ongoing investigation, but that Malik was suspended immediately. Angela felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This wasn't right. That evening, she sat down with Malik, trying to understand what had happened. Malik explained that he had been at school that day, but had no idea how his name got brought into the incident. He swore he hadn't done anything wrong. Angela looked into his eyes and believed him. She had raised him to be honest, to take responsibility for his actions, and Malik wasn't the type to lie to his mother. Angela's mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that her son had been unfairly singled out. She'd heard stories from other black parents in town who felt their kids were often treated differently in school, punished more harshly than their white classmates for similar things. But Angela had always hoped that Malik and Jordan wouldn't have to face that kind of treatment. Maybe she'd been naive, thinking that things like that couldn't happen here. The next day, Angela visited the school, determined to get to the bottom of things. The principal seemed almost dismissive, brushing off her questions and insisting that the evidence pointed to Malik. But when she pressed him, he couldn't give her any concrete proof, just vague statements about multiple witnesses who claimed Malik was in the area. Angela left the meeting feeling frustrated, a sense of injustice simmering in her chest. As the days went by, Angela kept digging. She started reaching out to other parents, hearing more stories that sounded all too familiar, stories of their kids being blamed for things they hadn't done or punished more harshly than others. Parents told her about incidents of black students being suspended for minor infractions, like talking out of turn or being a few minutes late to class. The more she listened, the more Angela felt certain that Malik wasn't alone. There was a bigger issue here. Angela knew she couldn't let this go. This wasn't just about Malik's suspension anymore. It was about standing up for all the kids who might have been treated unfairly. She couldn't bear the thought of Malik, or any child, feeling they weren't welcome or safe in their own school. It was her job as a mother to protect her kids, and she wasn't about to back down now. As she continued gathering stories and evidence, Angela realized she was stepping into a fight that might be bigger than she'd first thought. She felt the weight of her decision, but also felt a surge of strength she hadn't known was there. Her love for her sons fueled her, and she knew she would fight as hard as it took to make sure they, and every other child in town, were treated fairly and given a safe space to learn. Angela felt a deep, steady determination growing inside her as she started to reach out to other families. Her son's situation wasn't just an isolated incident, and the more she heard, the clearer this became. After that meeting with the principal, Angela couldn't just go back to her normal routine. Malik was still suspended, and each day he sat at home, frustrated and worried. Angela knew she had to dig deeper, not just for her son, but for all the kids who might be going through similar struggles. One evening, Angela met with another mother she'd heard had a similar experience. They sat together at a small coffee shop, leaning in close over their warm mugs as the mother shared her story. Her son had also been accused of something he didn't do, with almost no proof. She said her son was made to feel like a troublemaker, even though he was one of the quietest kids in school. Angela could see the pain in the other mother's eyes and felt her own heart ache with understanding. After that meeting, Angela reached out to more parents, some of whom she knew only from seeing around town. Slowly, people started opening up, sharing stories that echoed her own experiences with Malik. One family told her how their daughter had been suspended for something as small as talking during class, even though other kids had been let off with warnings for the same thing. Another family mentioned that their son was often sent out of the classroom for minor things, like asking too many questions. These stories piled up, creating a picture that was hard to ignore. Angela realized that the pattern was too strong to be a coincidence. Black children, like her Malik, were being treated unfairly, often labeled as troublemakers or threats, even for minor mistakes. She could feel the weight of these stories, knowing that these were children, just kids who wanted to learn, make friends, and feel safe at school. Despite the fear creeping in, Angela was becoming more determined. She started keeping a notebook where she wrote down every story, every incident, every detail the parents shared. She knew that if she was going to take this issue to the school board, she would need facts. These stories weren't just complaints. They were the lived experiences of families who wanted the best for their kids. One evening, after gathering more stories, Angela decided it was time to take her concerns to the school board. She prepared herself, going over the stories, thinking of the right words to say. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that she might face resistance. After all, not everyone in the town wanted to believe that racial bias could exist in their schools. But Angela had a clear goal. She wasn't just going to be quiet about this. She was determined to make sure her voice was heard. As she stood in front of the board members, Angela felt all the eyes in the room on her. Her hands shook a little, but she spoke clearly, sharing some of the stories she'd collected. She explained how these children, just because of the color of their skin, seemed to be treated differently. She talked about Malik's suspension and how she'd seen him become withdrawn, worried, and uncertain about his place in a school he once loved. She could see some of the board members shift uncomfortably in their seats, but she didn't stop. Her words came from the heart, from her love for her children, and the belief that every child deserved to feel safe and respected. When she finished, there was silence in the room. Some people looked sympathetic, but others seemed dismissive. One board member thanked her for her passion, but said that these issues were complicated and couldn't be addressed so easily. Angela felt a pang of frustration, but she didn't let it show. She'd known this wouldn't be an easy fight, but seeing the dismissive faces of some board members only strengthened her resolve. Angela left the meeting feeling mixed emotions, frustration, but also a renewed sense of purpose. She knew this wasn't going to be a quick fix, and she would probably have to face more pushback. But she also knew she wasn't alone. More parents were standing with her, ready to speak out. Angela didn't have all the answers, but she was ready to keep fighting. She'd made a promise to herself that night. She was going to do everything in her power to make sure Malik Jordan and every other child had a fair chance in a system that was supposed to support them, not tear them down. Angela left that school board meeting feeling a mix of emotions, frustrated, but also more determined than ever. She was learning that change wouldn't come easily, and not everyone in her town wanted to hear what she had to say. But Angela didn't have the option of giving up. This fight wasn't just for Malik, it was for all the kids who deserved a fair shot. One afternoon, as Angela was looking through her notebook filled with stories from other parents, she got a call from an older teacher who'd recently retired. She was surprised, as she barely knew this teacher, but she picked up the phone, curious. The teacher introduced herself in a warm, slightly shaky voice, and she told Angela she'd heard about her efforts to bring change to the school. Angela listened, nodding along, wondering where this conversation would go. Then the teacher's voice softened, and she admitted, almost hesitantly, that she too had seen things in the school that didn't sit right with her. The teacher explained that over the years, she had seen countless black students being treated unfairly. She remembered seeing them getting harsher punishments for minor mistakes, while other students were given second or third chances. She'd never felt comfortable speaking up back then, afraid of losing her job, but now, in retirement, she felt like it was time to tell the truth. She even had a few records she'd saved over the years, quietly noting down cases that seemed unjust. Angela felt a sense of relief and gratitude as she listened to the teacher's story. Knowing that someone who had been in the school system for years was willing to speak out gave her hope. This teacher was able to share details, examples of incidents that Angela hadn't even known about. She mentioned specific cases where students of color had been disciplined more severely than their white classmates for the same behaviors. Hearing these stories from a teacher, a professional who had been in the classrooms, who had seen the system up close, confirmed Angela's fears. This was not just her imagination, and it was certainly not just her family's problem. The teacher offered to come forward and share her observations with the school board. But Angela knew they would need more than just stories and anecdotes to make a real impact. They needed undeniable evidence. She spent the next few days talking to her new allies, including the retired teacher, parents from the community, and even a local pastor who had taken interest in her cause. Together, they came up with a plan to gather more concrete proof of the unfair treatment that had been happening in the school. Angela reached out to the local media, hoping that reporters would cover the issue and bring some public pressure to the school board. It was a risk, opening her family up to more scrutiny, but she felt it was the only way to make her voice heard. Soon, a local news reporter called her back, expressing interest in her story. Angela shared her concerns, the experiences of other families, and the support she was receiving from people like the retired teacher. The reporter seemed genuinely moved by Angela's words and agreed to write an article on the issue. When the article came out, it spread quickly around town. Angela noticed people whispering when she walked down the street or picked up groceries. Some people seemed supportive, offering her small nods or a quiet thank you as they passed by. Others, however, gave her icy stares, clearly uncomfortable with the attention she was bringing to the issue. But Angela tried not to let it bother her. She reminded herself why she was doing this, focusing on Malik and Jordan and all the other kids who needed someone to stand up for them. The article put pressure on the school board, who now had to respond to the growing awareness around the issue. They couldn't just dismiss Angela as a concerned mother anymore. Now the whole town was watching. In response, the school board agreed to hold a special meeting to discuss the issue. Angela prepared for the meeting by going over her notes, gathering more stories, and speaking to families who hadn't yet come forward. The night before the meeting, Angela sat with Malik and Jordan, explaining why she was doing all this. Malik, who had been feeling the weight of his suspension, looked at his mom with a mix of gratitude and awe. He was old enough to understand the risk his mom was taking and the courage it took to keep going, even when the town seemed split in its opinion of her. Jordan, a bit younger, simply hugged his mom, telling her he was proud. Angela went to bed that night feeling the strength of her family behind her. The path ahead was still uncertain, and she knew there would be more battles to face, but she wasn't scared. She was a mother who loved her children fiercely, and nothing, no amount of resistance, no cold stares or dismissive words, was going to stop her from standing up for them. Angela stepped into the school board meeting room, her heart racing, but her face calm. She looked around at the crowd that had gathered, parents, teachers, community members, and even some reporters. She could feel the tension in the air, the curiosity, the judgment. She knew some people supported her, but others were still uncomfortable with the attention she was bringing to the issue. Angela took a deep breath, remembering why she was there, focusing on Malik, Jordan, and all the other children who had faced unfair treatment. The school board members sat at a long table at the front of the room, their expressions serious. Angela recognized a few of them from her last visit, but this time she didn't feel as alone. Beside her sat the retired teacher who had reached out, as well as the local pastor and a few parents who had come to support her. Knowing they were there gave her courage. She knew this meeting would be tough, but she was ready. When her turn came to speak, Angela stood up, holding her notes tightly in her hands. She began by thanking the school board for allowing her to speak again. Then, she shared a few of the stories she had gathered, real examples of how black students in the district had been punished more harshly than others for the same actions. She talked about Malik's suspension, about how he'd felt singled out and discouraged, even though he hadn't done anything wrong. She explained how this wasn't just about one incident. It was a pattern affecting many families. Angela looked at the faces of the board members as she spoke. Some of them looked uncomfortable, while others seemed genuinely concerned. She knew it wasn't easy for them to hear these things, but it wasn't easy for her either. She was opening up painful experiences, sharing moments of frustration and hurt, not just for herself, but for all the families who had reached out to her. She hoped her words would make them understand the impact of their decisions, how deeply these issues affected real people's lives. After Angela finished speaking, the retired teacher shared her observations from her years working in the district. She talked about the patterns she'd seen, times when students of color were disciplined more strictly than their classmates. She spoke with a gentle but firm voice, bringing a sense of quiet authority to the room. People listened closely, perhaps because it was rare for a teacher to openly admit seeing unfairness within the school system. As the teacher spoke, Angela felt a sense of hope. It wasn't just her voice now. It was someone from inside the system, someone who had witnessed these things firsthand. The teacher's words gave weight to Angela's concerns, showing that this issue wasn't just a parent's complaint. It was a real, systemic problem. When the teacher finished, the board members opened the floor for questions. Some people in the crowd asked genuine, thoughtful questions, wanting to understand the issue better. But a few others were defensive, asking Angela why she was stirring up trouble, why she couldn't just let things go. Angela felt her hands tighten around her notes, but she kept her voice steady. She explained, once again, that this wasn't about causing trouble. It was about making sure every child was treated fairly, that they all had a safe, supportive place to learn. She wasn't asking for special treatment, only equal treatment. The meeting went on for a while, with more back and forth discussions. The board members seemed unsure of how to respond. Some offered vague promises to look into the issue, while others avoided making any commitments. Angela felt a familiar frustration building up inside her, but she didn't let it show. She knew this was just one step, that real change would take time, but she wasn't backing down. As the meeting wrapped up, Angela stood with the other parents, exchanging quiet words of encouragement. The retired teacher gave her a small, reassuring smile, and the pastor placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, saying he was proud of her. The support meant everything to Angela, giving her the strength to keep going, even when the road seemed uncertain. As she walked out of the building, Angela could hear people whispering, some thanking her for speaking up, others casting judgmental glances. But she didn't let any of it shake her. She had done what she came to do. She'd made her voice heard, shared the truth, and stood up for her children. That night, as Angela sat with Malik and Jordan, she explained what had happened at the meeting, making sure they knew why she was fighting so hard. She wanted them to understand that they deserved to be treated fairly, that no one should make them feel small or undeserving because of who they were. Malik nodded, a new understanding in his eyes, while Jordan gave her a quiet hug, resting his head on her shoulder. After the school board meeting, Angela was exhausted, but she felt like she'd made a small step forward. She could tell that people were paying attention now, and her story had sparked conversations around town. But deep down, Angela knew that one meeting wasn't enough to bring real change. She would need to keep the momentum going if she wanted to see a difference in how kids like Malik were treated in school. The next morning, Angela started thinking about what more she could do. She decided to reach out to a few parents who had been supportive at the meeting, hoping to get them involved in a more active way. She invited them over to her small living room one evening. The parents gathered, some bringing their own stories and worries, others just there to listen and learn. Angela began by sharing her idea to create a parent group that would stand together to push for fair treatment of all students. This group would be a voice for children who often felt overlooked or mistreated. If enough parents were willing to speak out, the school board would have to listen. They discussed organizing meetings, bringing more parents into the fold, and gathering more information to present to the board. One father spoke up, expressing concerns about backlash. He'd seen friends lose their jobs or face discrimination for speaking up on sensitive topics. Angela understood his fear. She'd felt it too. But she reminded everyone that this fight was not just about one child or one family. It was about building a community where all children could feel safe and supported. Slowly, nods of agreement filled the room, and a sense of unity settled among them. Over the next few weeks, Angela and the parents in the group worked together to gather more stories. They wanted to build a strong case that would show the school board how deeply this problem affected families in their community. Some parents were hesitant to share their experiences publicly, afraid of what people might say, but Angela reassured them, promising that their voices would be respected. As they collected stories, Angela began to notice a pattern. It wasn't just that Black students were punished more severely, they were also often labeled as troublemakers or disruptive from a young age. Small actions, like asking a question out of turn or being a few minutes late, were treated as bigger issues than they would be for other students. These labels followed the children, affecting their confidence, their friendships, and even how teachers viewed them over time. Angela knew that if they could present this pattern clearly, the school board wouldn't be able to ignore it. They needed real data, not just personal accounts, to show the disparities in discipline. One of the parents in the group suggested reaching out to a local advocacy organization that specialized in educational justice. Angela liked the idea, hoping they could help analyze the data and provide some guidance on how to proceed. When Angela contacted the advocacy organization, they were incredibly supportive. They offered to help her group collect and analyze data on discipline rates across different student demographics. They explained that by comparing suspension and detention rates among different groups, they could highlight any patterns of bias within the school system. Angela was thrilled. She knew that this data, combined with the parents' stories, would give their case the strength it needed. With the organization's help, they collected data showing that Black students were more likely to receive harsh punishments than their peers, even for minor incidents. The numbers were clear and undeniable, painting a picture that Angela knew the school board couldn't easily dismiss. Armed with this information, Angela and the parent group prepared to meet with the board again. As the next board meeting approached, Angela felt a mixture of nerves and determination. She knew that she was stepping into uncomfortable territory, but she also knew that she couldn't back down. She was no longer just a mother fighting for her son. She was part of a larger movement, one that aimed to create fairness and justice for all students in the district. On the day of the meeting, Angela and the parents arrived early, carrying their stories, their notes, and the data they had gathered. The room filled up quickly, with more parents, teachers, and community members than before. Some people were there to support her. Others were still skeptical. But Angela stood tall, fueled by the belief that what they were doing was right. As Angela addressed the school board, she spoke with a calm yet powerful voice. She presented the data, explaining what it showed and how it reflected the personal stories she shared previously. She explained that these patterns weren't just statistics. They were affecting real children, children who felt discouraged and labeled unfairly. Angela left the board meeting feeling more hopeful than she had in a long time. She could tell that the board members were finally beginning to see the issue as serious and real. They couldn't ignore the stories and data she and the parent group had collected. But Angela knew that words and promises were one thing, real change was another. This was just one step, and there was still much to do. In the following days, Angela and the parents kept meeting regularly, each gathering at her home to talk about their next steps. They knew they needed to keep the pressure on the school board, so they started brainstorming ways to make sure their efforts stayed in the public eye. One parent suggested organizing a community event, a kind of town hall where families could come and openly discuss their experiences. Angela loved the idea. It would give people who might feel isolated a place to feel heard and understood. They chose a weekend for the event and spread the word through social media, community centers, and even local businesses. Angela and her group wanted everyone to know they were invited. They even managed to secure a small space at a local church hall, which could fit a good number of people comfortably. Angela spent hours preparing for the event, making sure everything would run smoothly. She hoped it would be an evening where parents could speak freely, without fear of judgment, and connect with others who shared similar experiences. The day of the town hall arrived, and Angela was both nervous and excited. She didn't know how many people would come, but as the evening went on, she saw familiar faces streaming in, along with many people she didn't recognize. Parents, teachers, students, and even a few curious community members filled the room. Angela felt a surge of gratitude for each person who took the time to show up. They were there not only to support her, but to support every child who had faced unfair treatment. As people settled in, Angela took a deep breath and stepped up to the front of the room. She welcomed everyone, thanked them for coming, and explained the purpose of the event. She reminded them that this was a space for open, honest conversation. Then she shared a little of her story, briefly describing the journey that had led her here and the goal of creating a fair environment for all children. After Angela finished, one parent stood up and shared her story. Her voice trembled slightly, but as she spoke, Angela could see the relief on her face. She described how her son had been labeled as a problem child since elementary school, even though he was well-behaved and curious. The parent explained that her son, much like Malik, had been treated differently simply because he looked different. Hearing this, Angela felt a pang of sadness, but she also felt the power of connection. She wasn't alone in this fight, and neither were these parents. One by one, more people shared their stories. A teacher stood up and admitted how she had noticed certain patterns but had been afraid to speak out, fearing backlash from her colleagues. A young man, a former student in the district, shared his own painful memories of feeling singled out and unfairly disciplined. His words moved the room, especially as he described how those experiences had affected his confidence and his view of school as a whole. Angela listened closely to every word, her heart swelling with both sadness and determination. Each story reinforced what she already knew. This issue was bigger than just one family or one school. It was something affecting many lives, shaping how young people saw themselves and their potential. By the time everyone had finished speaking, the room felt charged with a shared sense of purpose. At the end of the evening, Angela invited people to join the parent group if they wanted to stay involved. Many hands went up, and Angela felt a surge of hope. She could see that the group was growing stronger, that more people were willing to stand with her. The town hall had not only brought people together, it had sparked a sense of unity and action that she hadn't felt before. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Angela stayed behind to thank each person who had come. She saw parents exchanging contact information, making plans to meet again, to share resources, and to continue supporting one another. The retired teacher who had helped her from the beginning gave Angela a warm hug, whispering that she was proud of her. The feeling of encouragement and support made Angela's heart swell. That night, as she returned home, Angela felt a quiet strength settling over her. She knew that these voices, now united, were a force that could not be easily silenced. They were a community now, no longer just individuals facing struggles on their own. And as she looked at her sleeping children, she felt more committed than ever to see this journey through to the end. Following the success of the town hall, Angela and the parent group felt a new sense of energy and purpose. They knew they had made an impact and gained momentum, but Angela was careful not to let them lose focus. The real work was just beginning, and they needed to keep building on the progress they had made. She called a meeting at her home with a core group of parents, knowing it was time to take the next steps toward real, lasting change. The group sat together in Angela's cozy living room, surrounded by cups of tea and the low hum of children playing in the next room. Angela began by sharing her thoughts about what they needed to do next. She suggested that they create a formal list of specific changes they wanted to see in the school system. It wasn't enough to simply ask for fair treatment. They needed clear, practical solutions that would address the unfairness they had seen. Everyone agreed, and they spent hours brainstorming. One parent suggested that schools should implement training programs for teachers and staff. These sessions would focus on understanding and addressing racial bias and discipline. Angela loved this idea. She knew that most teachers wanted to do the right thing, but often didn't have the tools or awareness to recognize their own biases. By helping teachers understand how certain behaviors were perceived differently based on a student's background, they could make strides toward a more supportive environment for all kids. Another parent proposed a peer review system for discipline decisions. This would involve a team of teachers and staff reviewing each suspension or serious punishment before it was finalized. The goal was to ensure consistency and fairness across the board, so no child would be treated more harshly based on appearance or background. Angela knew this might be challenging to implement, but she could see how it would prevent unfair punishments from being issued in the first place. As the meeting continued, the parents came up with a list of several actionable ideas. They included programs to encourage open communication between teachers and families, ways to recognize students' achievements beyond academics, and even events that celebrated cultural diversity. Angela wrote each idea down carefully, knowing that this list represented not only their hopes, but also their vision for a better school environment. This wasn't just about fixing problems. It was about creating a place where every child could thrive. Over the next few weeks, Angela and the group began preparing to present their plan to the school board. They knew they needed to gather as much community support as possible, so they started reaching out to more parents, local leaders, and even nearby advocacy groups. Some of the parents went door to door, explaining their ideas to neighbors and collecting signatures of support. Angela created a simple flyer that outlined their goals, making sure to keep it clear and straightforward so that anyone reading it could understand their mission. Meanwhile, Angela also worked on her speech for the board meeting. She wanted to be sure she represented everyone's voices and stayed focused on the solutions they were proposing. She practiced late into the night, reading her speech aloud to herself and adjusting her words until they felt just right. She wanted the board members to feel the same sense of urgency she did, to see that these changes were necessary for the well-being of all students. The night of the board meeting finally arrived, and Angela felt a mix of excitement and nerves. She was joined by a larger group this time: parents from the town hall, teachers who quietly supported the cause, and even some older students who had faced unfair treatment themselves. Together, they filed into the meeting room, filling nearly every seat. Angela felt a sense of pride and gratitude as she looked around at the faces surrounding her. This was more than a parent group now. It was a community ready to stand up for their children. When Angela's turn came, she took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. She began by thanking the board for their time and acknowledging that the district had done much to support students over the years. Then, she moved into the heart of her speech, sharing stories that represented the voices of the parents beside her. She talked about the parents' wish for a fairer, more supportive environment, emphasizing that this wasn't just about pointing out problems, but working together towards solutions. Angela then presented their list of proposals, each one thoughtfully crafted to address the biases they had seen. She spoke about the importance of teacher training, the need for a peer review system, and the benefits of cultural programs that celebrated diversity. Each proposal was met with nods of interest from the crowd, and Angela could tell that her words were hitting home. In the weeks following the school board meeting, Angela and the parent group waited anxiously to hear any news. They knew change would take time, but the anticipation felt endless. They had put their hearts into those proposals, and the thought of them being overlooked was difficult to bear. Angela kept busy by staying in touch with the other parents, giving everyone updates as best as she could, and reminding them to stay hopeful. She knew that, even though they couldn't control the board's decisions, they had done everything they could to make their voices heard. One afternoon, just as Angela was beginning to wonder if they'd ever get a response, she received a call from one of the school board members. He wanted to meet with her to discuss their proposals in more depth. Angela's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. She immediately called the core group of parents, and together they prepared to meet with the board member, reviewing their notes and discussing key points they wanted to highlight. They knew this meeting was critical, and they wanted to make the best impression possible. The day of the meeting, Angela arrived at the school district's office with two other parents who had been deeply involved since the beginning. They sat across from the board member, a man who appeared genuinely interested in what they had to say. He began by thanking them for their dedication and acknowledging that the school district had needed to reevaluate its policies for a while. Angela felt a surge of relief as she realized that, for once, they weren't being brushed aside. This board member seemed to genuinely want to understand their concerns and find solutions. Angela and the parents went over the proposals once more, explaining why each idea was essential for creating a fairer, more inclusive environment. They talked about the need for teacher training and how it could help educators better understand the students they worked with. They explained that a peer review system could bring more objectivity to discipline, ensuring that decisions were fair and based on facts rather than assumptions. Angela could see the board member listening closely, nodding as they spoke, and asking thoughtful questions. During the meeting, Angela was careful to emphasize that they weren't there to place blame on the teachers or the district. They wanted the board to see that these changes would help everyone, creating a school environment where both students and teachers could thrive. She spoke with calm but firm determination, explaining that their group wasn't going to give up until they saw real steps toward change. By the end of the meeting, Angela felt a renewed sense of hope. The board member promised to take their proposals back to the rest of the board, saying he would recommend that they begin reviewing policies and consider implementing their suggestions. A week later, Angela received an invitation to another school board meeting. This time, it was to discuss potential policy changes openly with the community. She shared the news with the group, and they quickly spread the word, encouraging as many parents and supporters as possible to attend. When the night of the meeting came, the room was filled with parents, teachers, and community members who had heard about the movement. Angela couldn't believe how many people had shown up. The atmosphere was electric, with everyone waiting to hear what the board would say. The board opened by acknowledging the hard work of Angela and her group. They explained that, after careful review, they had decided to begin implementing some of the group's proposals. They would start with teacher training on bias and cultural sensitivity, and they would introduce a peer review process for serious disciplinary actions. They also agreed to establish a committee made up of teachers, parents, and even students, who would work together to keep an eye on the discipline system and ensure fairness. As Angela listened, her heart swelled with pride and gratitude. This was what she had hoped for, a real commitment to change. She glanced at the other parents around her, many of whom had tears in their eyes, feeling the weight of their efforts finally paying off. This wasn't just a small victory for Malik or Angela's family. It was a step forward for every family in the district. After the board finished speaking, they opened the floor for questions and comments. Angela stood up, her voice filled with emotion as she thanked the board for listening and taking action. She reminded them that the work was far from over and that their group would continue to be there, supporting the district and holding them accountable. She could see that her words resonated with both the board and the audience. As the sun rose the next morning, Angela felt a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling inside her. She had a busy day ahead. It was time to take the plans from their recent meetings and put them into action. The group had decided that their first major event would be a community gathering aimed at raising awareness about racial bias in schools. Angela wanted this event to be not just informative, but also empowering, giving families the tools they needed to stand up for their children. Angela spent the morning calling local businesses to gather donations for food and supplies. She wanted to make sure that everyone who came would feel welcome and included. The more people who attended, the stronger their message would be. To her surprise, many local shops were eager to help. They believed in the cause and wanted to support their community. With every call, Angela felt a growing sense of hope. She could see how this was becoming a collective effort, with everyone coming together to make a difference. Once she secured enough donations, Angela turned her attention to promoting the event. She designed colorful flyers that explained what the gathering was about and how families could get involved. The flyers included stories from parents about their experiences with bias in schools, illustrating the real issues the community faced. Angela and a few parents spent an afternoon putting up flyers at schools, libraries, and community centers, spreading the word far and wide. They also created a social media page where people could RSVP and share their own stories. As the days passed, excitement continued to build. Angela started planning the agenda for the gathering. She wanted it to be a safe space for everyone, where people could share their experiences without fear of judgment. The event would feature speakers, including teachers who understood the issues and were willing to share their perspectives. Angela hoped their voices would help bridge the gap between parents and educators, showing that they were all on the same team when it came to the children's education. On the day of the event, Angela arrived early to set up. She was amazed by the turnout. The room was filled with families, teachers, and community leaders. The atmosphere buzzed with energy and hope. Tables were set up with food, and colorful banners hung on the walls, each one carrying messages of unity and strength. Angela felt a wave of pride wash over her as she watched people chatting and connecting with one another. When the gathering began, Angela took the stage to welcome everyone. She expressed her gratitude for the support and highlighted the importance of coming together to confront the challenges facing their children. She shared her own story and the reasons behind the event, explaining that this was just the start of their journey together. The crowd listened intently, and Angela could see their interest and passion. The first speaker, a local teacher, shared her experience of realizing her own biases in the classroom. She talked about how it affected her students and why it was important for educators to reflect on their actions and beliefs. The teacher's honesty resonated with many in the room. People nodded along, understanding that change was needed from both sides, parents and teachers. It was heartening to see the connection forming between educators and parents, all of them united in their desire to create a better environment for children. As the event continued, parents took turns sharing their own stories. Angela listened to each one, feeling a mix of sadness and solidarity. Each story was a reminder of the struggles families face daily, but the courage in sharing those experiences filled the room with hope. Parents supported one another, offering words of encouragement and understanding. It was clear that they were not alone in their fight. Angela had arranged breakout sessions where people could discuss specific topics, like advocating for their children, understanding school policies, and building supportive networks. Each group buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the sound of people sharing ideas. Angela moved from group to group, feeling the energy and determination in the air. She encouraged everyone to keep talking, to keep sharing, and to build connections that could last beyond this event. As the gathering wrapped up, Angela felt a surge of joy. People exchanged contact information and made plans to meet again. The support was palpable, and the sense of community was stronger than ever. Many parents thanked her for organizing the event, expressing how empowered they felt. Angela realized that they were creating something special, a community that would stand together, advocating for their children and seeking change.